Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just by way of, it's 12:30 p.m. on March the 1st. We're continuing our afternoon session of the Legislative Salary Council. On the agenda this afternoon, we have the Commissioner of Management and Budget, Jim Showalter, will be joining us to talk about the February forecast and what that means, hopefully going forward. After that, we're going to be talking about labor contract considerations with Aaron Campbell and Jen Placement. They said Posse, okay. Anyway, and then we'll proceed into our discussion as a council after these presentations. So I ask you to listen carefully, for questions. And with that, I invite Commissioner Showalter to tell us about the forecast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Jim Showalter, Commissioner of MMD. I'm going to try to bring up some slides, though, as we hopefully this will work smoothly. And there it is. All right, so that's good. I just want to check the time. Walk a little bit of time. How long would you like? How much forecast do you like?
You know, I would like you to cover it. To cover the material. I don't know that we have any time. We have to get out of this room at a certain time.
I think 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
We had a 2-hour presentation at Ways and Means Finance. I don't think
well, maybe a little bit.
So I'll go for 10, 15 minutes. Do questions and we can go in deeper depth if you want. Obviously, you've got spectacular staff working with you as well, between Michelle and Barb. You've got people who know the forecast, the state finances, as well as anyone around you. But I'll walk you through the budget economic forecast, and I'll start with just some basics because many of you actually know quite a lot about this already, but some of you may not. And it's a habit that the state has had for decades. It's a twice a year projection of budget and economic information, putting all of these different narratives in one place. So, you know, there's global economic, macroeconomic things going on. There's national issues going on. There's some parts of the economy that may be growing or contracting. There are changes in people's income or assets that all of these impact their tax revenues and also our spending. And so pulling all of these things together in one place gives the governor a grounding as to where they might put their budget recommendations. And then the update in February takes into account something like the Christmas sales and the first of the year kind of collections. And that gives the legislature and the governor kind of a refreshed look as to the state of things and what is available to the upcoming budget. The short version of this is really included on this next slide. Get that. And there's a couple of key points out of this, and the top line view is that the budget outlook is stable. That there haven't been those kinds of shocks or unexpected events that have really buffeted the state of the nation and the globe the last several years. At least since last November, things have been relatively consistent, and so our top line number, when you take all of these factors out, we're still at about $17.5 billion, basically spot on to where we were in the previous forecast. That said, that top number doesn't tell the whole story. It's just one number. There's a lot of sub-stories underneath it, and I'll walk you through at least some of those, and that includes higher revenues, higher tax collections going through prior years, as well as to an extent consistent going into the future. There's a significant law change, how we look at the forecast and prepare the forecast. This entire effort is a current law forecast. I just want to underscore that. This is a habit by Minnesota to look not just in the current year, not even just the biennium coming up, but over a 4-year period. And that is governed by what are the current laws for long-term care? What are the current laws for education? And those get reflected in the forecast. We'll get into that more in a little bit. Underneath it all, the U.S. economic outlook is slightly improved, slightly lower anticipated inflation, a little bit milder recession is included in this forecast. But that's kind of the top line issues that we see in this projection. But, to go a little bit further in, let's start with this, like, what is municipal? And what you see here is a graphic that shows you the center. Close enough. It gives you a sense of the order of magnitude of the numbers and how we got there. On the left-hand side, you see the November forecast. When we did our first sort of scan of the environment. And in some ways, it surprised a lot of people. $17.5 billion, that's incredible. But for those of you who look at this information, you would have assumed that it's actually going to be a pretty big number. For the simple reason that we left the prior legislative session. I'll speak up a little bit.
Thank you.
Absolutely. That we left the last legislative session without using all of the resources that were already known at that point in time. There was about $7 billion in one-time resources, and there was about $5 billion that we already knew were likely to occur in the future. These are two different concepts, just giving to you real quick. Carry forward, like money that's already occurred in prior years. Money that's in the bank essentially, or close to in the bank, and they're prior to the budget period that we're talking about. Structural balance is a comparison of money in and money out in any given period of time. So we knew that we were going to have about $12 billion even before we did any forecast changes in November. And so that's what that left-hand bar really shows us. We knew we were going to have about $7 billion left over from the previous session. It was going to grow by about $5 billion because we expected revenues to exceed spending for the 24-25 biennium. And when we looked through the economy and revenues and spending, we added another $5.9 billion to that figure, getting us to the 17.5. So it's really an accumulation over a number of years. This forecast adds a couple more considerations on the left side. A little bit more money is coming in from previous years. And our monthly revenue numbers continue to outperform expectations. But a lot of that is in the rearview mirror. Things that are current numbers like sales tax, withholding actually are coming in a little bit lighter than the forecast. But that shows up in the next line where you see the improvement in the revenue forecast. Yep, it's continuing, but it's actually not continuing at the same level. And then the third piece is increasing the spending forecast. Been a conversation piece for a number of years back, all the way back to I think 2002, when it was removed from the forecast. With this forecast, we're changing one of the assumptions or one of the pieces in it, and that is to include discretionary inflation that's outside the control of the legislature. And so that added a significant part of that increase in spending that we're showing on that last bar. You put all those together, you get to the right-hand side. Revenues went up in a couple of different ways. The changes in spending pretty much counteracted that. And so we get to a slightly different composition of our numbers, but it's still at a $17.5 billion figure. For those of you who like numbers, this is the same story in a slightly different format. You see on the right-hand side, left-hand side where sort of that starting balance is. And then from there we go and you can see the changes. You start with the changes in the current beginning balance. That's the carry forward number added to the beginning balance. Revenues continue to grow in the budget period. That's $599. Estimated inflation is $1.4 billion of that $1.5 billion change. Minor changes in the reserves, and that's where you get. So we're at an all-time high in terms of the budgetary balance, but in terms of the structural balance and sort of where we're at, it's a pretty simple picture. I'm going to walk through real quick. I'm going to do a faux economic presentation. I'm not the state economist. Dr. Laura Kolobakides, who's a professor at the University of Minnesota, is, and thankfully she and other economists combined to look at a national outlook that we get from IHS Markit, and then interpret that for the state revenue forecast. What you see here is continued growth in the economy, coming out of a very mild recession in this current year. While we're still anticipating 2 quarters of negative economic growth in this year, previously that anticipated 3. You'll see the comparison of unemployment rates. We're continuing to see strength in the economy, and as you see in the media and popular media, that possibility of a soft landing, of slowing inflation, yet managing to keep the economy going. It seems to be a little bit more likely than we had previously anticipated. Inflation is obviously one of the huge factors. What you see here is our annual change in the CPI anticipated during this period of time. We're coming off of a biennium in which we have substantial increases in inflation. When I talk about inflation in the forecast, I just note that that is not counting like the 22 and the 23 inflation that's in the rearview mirror. But obviously, we had significant increases in the last couple of years, and economic policy is hopefully driving that down. We see that working so far. There's evidence that that will continue to trend down back to more of a trend inflation number of 2 to 3%. The corporate profits of the last couple of years has certainly been one of the drivers of our unexpected sort of growth in revenue. So you can see from 2020 to 2022, you see a significant growth in corporate profits. While those tend to be volatile figures, nonetheless, that drove overperformance in some of our revenues, and we see that flattening out for sure. But nonetheless, that growth is significant and is part of the reason why we are looking at significant balances we had not anticipated. Minnesota's labor market also remains very strong. You're wondering what's going on in other states. Now, certainly, recovery from a recession level of employment has happened in most states. Minnesota still hasn't gotten there, but it's not for lack of trying. We have unemployment rates at 2.5%, which is significantly lower than the national numbers. We're 4th lowest among all the states. It's also not because we have more people on the sidelines than other states. Our labor force participation rate is in fact higher than most other states, and is consistently higher than other states. That little box up there notes that Minnesota is at 67.9 compared to the U.S. at 62.3. That is a significant and enduring trait in Minnesota, that our labor force participation rate is significantly higher than other states. As I mentioned, other states have found ways to sort of continue growing, and the number of employed continues to grow. Minnesota, we have as well, but the net numbers in the future growth looks to be constrained just simply because of population and workforce. So you can see in 2019 and 2018, the numbers were a little bit more robust than we're projecting out in the next several years. And much of that is just our labor force tightness, that we don't see as many opportunities for growth as we had before. That all kind of comes through to the revenue forecast, where you see continued strength across the board, and a sort of a stability that leads to a $600 million improvement in 24 and 25. A little bit less than the improvement that we're seeing in 22 and 23 of $753 million. Each of these tax types behaves a little bit differently in this economy, but the short version is, where it seems sort of projecting steady individual income tax numbers overall. Sales tax down just a hair. Corporate franchise tax is up, but note that the biennial revenues from those two is down. So we still anticipate those corporate revenues to go down, but just not as much as we had previously. So that's the revenue story. There's a lot of risks, as always. I can get into these more if you want, but no, I think all of these topics are probably familiar to you. And I'll just touch real quickly on the spending numbers and we'll get to questions. Recent legislation drives the spending change. We have current law changes in Health and Human Services, education, property tax, and other things. There's not too many changes in this area. Things like federal law, which ends the public health emergency and sort of transit helps us to transition back to a Medicaid rate that is more normal. We don't get the enhanced FMAP anymore, is part of the story, and one of those pieces in Health and Human Services on education changes in people count that drive it. Estimated inflation on that last line at $1.4 billion is the primary number here. That is looking again at a gross high level look inflation not already captured in those other lines. It's consistent based on the CPI numbers that I showed you previously, and is not targeted towards any particular programs, but really the overall level of spending that doesn't have some factor of inflation already built in current law. You get an impact to sort of a proportion. Sort of hard to figure, but this I think graphic gives you just a sense that, you know, while it's a talking point, it's a key consideration, and it changes sort of the bottom line numbers. You can see how significant it is compared to the overall general fund spending by year. It's a relatively small portion of the overall numbers, but it is there in comparison with the base expenditures. That gets us to the long-term outlook, where you're really just taking the money in and money out by in parallel. Minnesota continues to be in a strong place. Our revenues and spending continue to have about a $5 billion structural balance, collecting more than we're spending under current law, and that's even after taking into account that impact of inflation. When I do your side math, the amount of inflation and those spending numbers is shown on the bottom of the slide. That's a good place to be. That's part of the reason why we can say, you know, it's not just a high balance that Minnesota is enjoying right now in its budget outlook, but also that we have a rough parity in the growth of our revenues and spending, and that gives us a lot of opportunities to look at changes, as well as management challenges, to not overspend, cut, get into a place. One of the things that, you know, early in my career, I worked in the state when Jesse Ventura had a much smaller opportunity, but it was a real opportunity, and we ended up making changes that created some problems just a couple of years later. So those are the kinds of challenges that lawmakers have on their plates right now, as does the government. So that's kind of a really quick, speedy conversation through the woods. We basically have been influenced by the snow over the last week, so we put a snow picture up here. The staff at M&D and other agencies still managed to put it all together, and haven't taken any questions.
Cool.
I'd like to come back to inflation just a little bit. So on one graph that you had highlighted inflation expected to settle beyond 2023. About 23 or so. So as we're talking about cost inflation, if you will, in our discussions over the next biennium, right now, in your forecast, you're showing 23 at 4%, 24 at 2.3. And I guess my question is going to be twofold. Number one, as we look at potential cost of living, do you think, I mean, if I do the math, is somewhere around 3% average, do you think going to hold, or do you see it kind of hanging at 4 and then something more occurring in 24 thereabouts? You understand?
I think so. So a couple of things. One, just so you know, these are calendar year numbers.
Okay.
So sometimes when we talk about fiscal years, they certainly have to split these numbers.
Yeah.
You can see both the assumptions last November and the current ones, and they're pretty consistent. We see the likelihood of persistent inflation higher than these numbers dropping. That that the pressure is starting to cool, whether it's because of supply chains getting worked out because of the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war getting worked out, and all kinds of different things going on. There's absolutely a possibility for higher outcomes. I think the Federal Reserve policy and the monetary policy kind of core that they signal pretty strongly that they will continue working to get it back to these target figures. Yeah.
Okay. And then the second question is, we obviously have sector, right? And so, you know, one of the suggestions this morning is that we kind of look possibly at what a median income looks like. So what would be the types of things that you view a living family? Are they, do you think the inflationary numbers that they deal with, food, you know, essential transportation, those type of things, will tend to follow these numbers? Or you?
Yeah, this is certainly there's more versions of the CPI for different purposes, and I'm probably not qualified to tell you which one is the perfect one. CPI is a reasonable one because it's a market basket of goods. But sometimes it can get disproportionately weighted like this. You know, 2 years ago, the used cars became super expensive. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
But CPI is a commonly used one, but there's certainly a good one. I guess I would say that, there's other things that we sometimes look at, the state expenditures over PPSL, but CPI is a common index.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I have a question. I've read that Minnesota has a lower inflation rate than other regions of the country. Is that true?
Say that again, a lower?
That Minnesota has a lower inflation rate than other regions of the country. Is that true? Is that even possible?
Possible. I don't know.
First,
Confirm or deny.
First,
I'm not sure.
Doesn't make sense.
I certainly, in all our presentations, we worked off the national, so it's possible, and we'd have to check the feed data and BLF to see if there's anything more specific to Minnesota. So it's possible. And part of it would be housing prices, things like that, might be regional variation. So it's certainly possible.
But the inflation numbers that you're doing are based on the national average.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Good. Encourage any questions or
Danny Byrne. Commissioner, you talked about the forecast risks.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like most of those, in fact, they may all be a kind of a national risk. Am I getting that right? The inflation is a national number, monetary policy, by the way, the Fed interest rates, things like that, corporate profit, that may be important. But if you look at just the state of Minnesota, in your forecasts, where do you think is the biggest risk? Seeing reality be close to what you forecast. That could go wrong.
Yeah. I'm not sure because the first reaction is that certainly national and global impacts us trump everything that we've got. And so any of those things, they ripple through and we really can't do too much about it. At the local level, I think we are reflecting a very tight labor market for the foreseeable future. I don't know that it can get much tighter or it's going to release. And there's going to be all kinds of people moving here from Texas. So I don't see that as being a huge swing in the short term. Energy prices and things like that are all much bigger than Minnesota. There's always a risk that we're just misguessing, estimating, misreading the tea leaves. So I guess there's this plain old forecasting error that also happens where the corporate volatility and things like that and capital gains tend to be a very volatile that source. And so our mix of revenues, we have the same risks as other governments, but we could be misreading.
What risks of spending as a result of law?
That's not a risk, it's more of an action and also what happens.
But you kind of accounted for that, haven't you? You identified spending change. You talked about E12, health, property tax debt, and then all other kind of that, anticipating what could pass and be expensive.
No, that does not include what could pass.
Oh,
so this is the starting point. This is a get ready, get set, go. We set up the budget forecast, which the governor has a baseline to put together his budget. We put this together and refresh it so that the legislature has a full set of information so they can react to that budget and propose their own. So this is a starting point, not an outcome or an estimate of their actions. This current law, proposed law with more on top of it. And so that's the next step, is that, as you were talking with the Senate Finance and House Ways and Means this morning, there are trying to look at, well, what do we do? What revenue changes do we make? What spending changes do we make, given the position we're in right now? Okay.
Thank you.
I think I have a follow-up on the employment question. You said, working, they're going, I think you're kind of joking, they're gonna flow here from Texas. I kind of doubt it, but. But I.
January or February.
But I do wonder the impact of this position where we have very high, comparatively, labor force participation. And we don't have, the ability to fill the position and how that's going to affect. I mean, obviously, we already see it pushing up, what people are willing to pay to get them for, stuff like that, which is an inflation.
So, you know, it's essentially once we set up this forecast, what's the answer? What do you do with it? And, you know, the governor's recommendations really point towards things that make it easier for people. If you're raising kids, if you want to be in the workforce, you've got other obligations, if you're trying to care for somebody, a loved one, like how do you support those activities both to free up the workforce and make sure that, you know, we can continue to grow opportunity for everyone? Because a lot of people are doing other things in their free time, like raising a family. And it's like, how do you make this all as less stressful as possible? Because that's one of the few things that are directly in our control, other than inflows and outflows of populations from domestically or internationally.
Commissioner, you had said the language you used that our labor market's going to get tighter. And I'm just trying to see what do you mean, by what perspective, from the employer standpoint, or from the employee standpoint?
And I was referring to like, what are the state risks? At the time, it was like, I guess you could say that the growth in employment could be even slower because the number of postings right now exceeds the number of applicants in the market.
Correct.
And so I guess, you know, that ratio could get even bigger, that there'd be even more postings for every one person who's looking for a job at any point in time.
And that, of course, is going to drive up wages.
Yeah, or substitution. People will start to do different things.
To me, that would be an indicator of inflation. Or am I reading something wrong?
No, I don't think you're necessarily. It may be that wages and income go up, but obviously, you know, when I go to McDonald's, sometimes I now have to enter my order at a kiosk. Right. You know, I used to tell somebody what I want. You know, there's substitutions that go on across the economy, and that'll contribute.
So I'm going to jump a little ahead. We had essentially, get my head wrapped around this billion, of $12 billion company. Yeah. So we now have a budget in place, and we'll have a budget in place by the end of May. Theoretically. In the next budget cycle, we're not going to have that $12 billion, because that's money that will be spent or gone, correct? Or no?
And what the legislature does, I would assume much of it will be spent, if not all. But I would have said that last year, and we ended up leaving with $7 billion on the bottom line.
I get that, but I suppose that the wise man's bet would be it'll get spent.
I take it, yeah.
How then now does that affect? So the budget went from 50 billion to 65 billion.
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect? What effect is that going to have in the next biennium? If you can tell, if you.
So that's a good question. That sort of gives you why this slide is useful. It really takes a look at sort of the ins and outs of what's available in the biennium.
Yes. And
then, so if you have, say, $12 billion one-time spending, or revenue reductions.
Yes.
Those figures are like over 24, 25 biennium, I go up like $12 billion either on the spending or on the revenue, or down on the revenue. You know, that's sort of how you would lose that carry forward. It would show up in those, you would add it to those figures. Okay. So it's like, if you think about it, it's like if there's $60 billion, let's just use easy math, $60 billion going through the state, in, and all $5 billion goes in out in projected spending, so you have $60 billion out. If an additional $12 billion is available for one-time tax reductions or new spending, is basically $72 billion are moving through the system for that biennium, and then it would revert back to about $64 billion. Because you have to be careful, and that's the challenge of making promises that you can sustain. And that is why those phrases of one time and carry forward come into our words just so often, because it's like you want to make promises that you're going to do something once or twice in this biennium, but you're going to do it 3 or 4 times and keep on doing it over time. You got to make sure you've got the revenues to support it.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I've heard various words to describe $17.5 billion in surplus, and many of them are, magnanimous sort of things. And from your perspective, over the last 10 years, how does $17.5 billion in surplus compare to previous years? For those of us that have a short memory.
I do too, and it's much higher. This is not territory that we are. Part of it's because the budgets are bigger. So the size of spending and revenues that we're buying in, is larger than before, and it grows with the economy. That said, $70 billion is something, and we're at that level, and it's partly because it's not a 1-year kind of swing. It's like this is a kind of a reaction to the last several years of uncertainty, as well as some gridlock. And you put them together, and you've got a opportunity, both in one-time nature and then some structural growth that's going on.
Well, I'm thinking back to when this council was constitutionally authorized. That was in 2017. You recall what were the budget surplus going back to 2017? I wonder if anybody has a historical perspective on that.
It's on our website.
It hasn't been that.
No. Normally the surplus is or deficit is in $1 to $5 billion range. That's kind of the normal range. Or when we had a $6 to $7 billion deficit back in the early 80s years, that was the biggest we've seen. And that was in 2011. So, give you an order of magnitude that was a big boost, and it was.
And the difference in the early Dayton years was we had a structural and we obviously were having less resources coming in from Texas and so on, and then we changed our tax law, so we increased what people would pay at the higher levels, right? So we are now in this different place. I don't know why we're so much higher. I don't quite You said that it's somewhat related to how much business corporations are making and the taxes on corporations. Right?
Sure. Part of this, I think it's difficult to just sort of track sometimes how there's not just one thing that causes a surplus or a deficit. It's also the timing and the reaction, the combination of spending obligations and revenue obligations, and trying to match them up in real time while you're going up and down on a fairly bumpy rate. So it's like drawing a great picture while you're standing up in your rowboat, and there's a lot of ways to go. The picture's not going to be quite the way you want. And that's what happens in the budget. If you're constantly kind of compensating for what you think is going on or about to go on. And the GDP, if you're in a obviously it's not the same every year, and that affects your revenues. And so we may have a good estimate of where it's going to be. We do not predict the future here at the COE, and we certainly don't control the future in the Centennial Office building. And so this is our best estimate of where we're going to be, and undoubtedly we're going to be wrong. And that adds to that volatility of the state budget that we try to manage through having reserves, through having more information than a lot of other states that have we take a longer look at it, so we have a longer time horizon, try to estimate and be aware of some of our biases. And then, as for that recency bias, and then, you know, I think finally it's just have great people, to try to make sure that you got the institutional knowledge and ability to interpret it reasonably and not get too taken up with whatever the latest data is.
Any other questions?
I don't the number from the school. Yeah, it was 1.052 billion.
That was 19, and 2021, probably.
Well, from the bar, you pull it up.
As you said, unprecedented.
Yeah, and you know, I think that, you know, I say it so many times, but I think it still continues to be true that we've lived on through an unusual time, unprecedented time. And, you know, there's been a lot of those. Every time is always a little bit different, but certainly the pandemic, we didn't have experience of what was going to happen. Nobody would have predicted that public property and that there was going to be really strong income growth for most of the population. We would not have anticipated really that the economy would be as resilient as it was. And through it all, our revenue system, frankly, was stress tested, and ours worked very well. Some other states had bigger problems, but they were more disproportionately putting the revenues in one place or another. Ours is pretty balanced, as it's already.
Commissioner, some of this excessive carryover stems from a legislature that couldn't reach agreement over the previous year. That sort of stymied spending.
Yeah. Spending more revenue reductions. Yeah. Absolutely. There were options on the table, certainly the governor's budget. We have proposals to deal with it. So there were legislative proposals that deal with it.
Is some of it also tied to the federal government taking over some state spending for low income?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the forecast improvement, Barb said, so there were a number of pieces that included, you know, the impact of the federal stimulus dollars that came in, and we picked those up as we work through our forecast. The adoption of enhanced FMAP rating, lower the state share of our healthcare program. So it's like those are big deals, and we folded them in each of the forecasts. So when we're setting the table for the governor and legislature, here's what we think is going on. And sometimes they acted in between those forecasts, but once they did, then we pick it up in the next forecast. So we had an understanding that, you know, our fiscal wins kept on getting better. I've been in this position again, improvements for the last 2.5 years, and certainly almost every forecast has gotten a little bit better. And in part because what's going on is the federal government really started kicking in right around 2021, where we sort of flipped, and it's like all of a sudden there was the federal government was helping pick up some of the pandemic costs. And with each successive 6 months a year, like there were significant new opportunities, investments that stabilized state finances. And that's part of the reason, you know, we're at federal government. Thank you. Thank you. I just thank you all for your service. I appreciate the time and attention. Good questions. And fortunately, we've got Jen and Aaron here to take you through some more. So our great unit. Thank you. Thank you.
And we have, is it Aaron Campbell and Jen Clausen? Okay. I do my. And you're going to be talking to us about labor contracts and some rate.
Here. Looking very promising. We just stand by for mission 5. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Jen Clausen. I am the Enterprise Director of Labor Relations here at Municipal Management and Budget. And I will just do a quick walkthrough of collective bargaining and the framework that we work within as we prepare to go into bargaining the next round of contracts. So I will cover just on a high level basis the legislative framework we operate within, some of the process that kind of goes behind the scenes as we're going through bargaining, and then the data that we collect and review with informing our determinations for setting compensation. So a couple of key statutory sections to keep in mind when we are doing our work here at NFB are Minnesota statutes 179A and 43A. So 179A is the Public Employment Labor Relations Act. So you'll hear me refer to it as PELRA. And that certainly has much broader reach than just state government, but the public sector in general. And then 43A, which is the state personnel management statute. Under PELRA, public employees have the right to negotiate and through their certified representative. And so there's some terms and conditions that are mandatory subjects of bargaining. So you'll see grievance procedures as part of that, and then terms and conditions of employment. So ones that people commonly think about are really those hours of employment, compensation, and benefit contributions. When we are establishing compensation levels, Minnesota Statute 43A also has some guidance and requirements for us. So NFB has to assure that compensation for state positions reasonably compare to compensation for similar positions internally and externally outside of state service. So things that are looked at are positions are comparable where they have similar skills, effort, responsibility, worker conditions. And that's really the framework when you're looking to determine comparability. We also have an obligation to comply with pay equity laws as well. The collective bargaining process, just want to kind of lay out the broader framework of the bargaining units that we have here at the state. So we have what we call the ASME master contract, that is the multi-unit contract. So that will cover clerical staff, the staff that are maintaining the buildings and within facilities, health assistants that are all throughout the agencies. So thinking military affairs, DHS. And then they have a couple of other units that are broke out. So the corrections officers that are in our prison, and then the radio communication operators who are providing that support for the state patrol. The other bargaining units that we have are MAPE, so that's our professional unit, and that is one of the other larger units that we have. So ASME Master and MAPE will have around 15,000 members. MLEA is our law enforcement group, and then middle management is that first level of supervisors. MNA is our nurses, MGEC is the engineers, and then SRSEA is the teachers. So teachers that are at Purpich, in the corrections facilities, and at the state academy. You'll see a few of the bargaining units has an asterisk by them, and those are our essential bargaining units. And the essential bargaining units under law do not have the right to strike, but they have a right to a process that's called an interest arbitration. So we would have a hearing if we're not able to reach agreement with them with a third-party arbitrator. Each contract runs for a 2-year cycle that mirrors the biennium. So we are preparing to open for the July 1, 23 through June 30th, 2025 contract cycle. So the current agreements that are in place run through June 30th. some of the steps that we take in getting prepared for bargaining, we actually start in the fall of the even years. So last fall, we were already beginning work in this space. We collect a lot of information from folks that are working within with our labor agreements. So our agency HR staff, agency heads, deputy commissioners, the diversity and disability community, Minnesota State, our insurance group, compensation team, and our payroll staff. We also collect data from other employers and jurisdictions about economic and non-economic issues. So thinking other public sector employers, we look at the private sector and what's going on in the private sector, look at neighboring states. And then we are also working the insurance team with the Joint Labor Management Committee on some topics that relate to our health plans. Next slide just kind of has the slide moving forward once we start opening our negotiations round. So we will be opening with AFSCME, NASTR, and NAPE bargaining units in early April. And then the coalition insurance bargaining will begin as well. So the coalition insurance is where all of the bargaining units have representatives and work together with their proposals related to the insurance plan in that negotiating framework. In May, we'll continue all of that bargaining. Some of the other bargaining units may open at that point, or the other bargaining units start picking up depending on the timing of being able to open with some of the other contracts. You'll see in June, we have what we refer to as push week, and it's our week where we schedule with both AFSCME and NAPE to work towards that final tentative agreement prior to expiration of the current agreement. And from there, between July and September, we continue negotiating with the other groups. We are working on getting final contracts put together and the red lines ready to send over to the legislature. And during that time, the unions are working with their membership on the voting process. Moving into late summer and into the fall, we begin sending contracts over to the legislature to receive potentially interim approval and go through the process with the subcommittee on employee relations, and then again continue to work through bargaining with the other units. And then next session, there would be final action taken by the full legislature to provide approval of the contracts. With our collective bargaining process, some goals that we keep in mind are obviously having proposals that meet agency and operational needs in order to support the agency mission and responsibilities, having proposals that are accepted by the unions, and then proposals that are supported by the legislature. Really, when you look at kind of the basic public policy statement with PELRA, it is to ensure that we are promoting orderly and constructive relationships with agencies, employees. And so that is really at the heart of when we're going through this process, working towards maintaining that. From the data collection side, I've alluded to a little bit some of the data that we collect, but certainly we're looking at demographics data. Right now, I think we've already, with the commissioner's presentation, had some questions about the labor market, and we're seeing numbers that are, it's a very tight labor market in Minnesota. Statewide turnover right now, the average is 12% across all classifications. And that's up from a couple of years ago, we were at about 8% turnover. Average time to fill right now is 80 to 85 days. So when you think when somebody leaves, it's a few months before the chair is on average filled behind that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the statutory framework under 43A of the factors that we need to take into consideration with internal and internal equity, and then also making sure that comparability to the external market. And then, again, as I had mentioned earlier, all of the data collection from the other public sector in Minnesota, neighboring states, and then just really that broader labor market picture. So going into a little bit more depth on the consideration and the factors MND looks at for pay increases. We use the K point system for evaluating job content as the framework for our statewide classification. So looking at the K points for a position, average turnover for the specific classification and how that compares to the statewide average, the time it takes to fill a particular job. Some jobs, you saw the current average is 80 to 85 days. Some jobs, you can see it where it's taking 180 days to fill, which is a long time to get that chair filled. And then just that broader market factors, particularly where we are seeing some challenges with these other factors identified above. So just to give you a kind of a frame of where we're at or where we've historically been with regards to the ATV, got the CAS 16 contracts on here from that historical perspective. And you can see they're ranging anywhere from the years where state budget looked a little bit different than the $17 billion surplus that Commissioner Showalter was just talking about with the zeros up to that 3.5%, 3.25% increases. So the recent years, the last few contracts have been in that 2.25% to 2.5% to 2% increases. And that's just my high level picture for you.
The footnote, the bolded cycles that reflect, it's covered by that Tyler.
Oh yeah, I don't know if I can move that. So that just talks about, there's a few in those bolded cycles where there were some small differences between the bargaining units with regards to those across the board increases. However, the differences aren't substantial. Sure. So I believe one of the years one of the group had an interest arb and they had a slightly different amount.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All the question.
Just, yes, to this graph, we're showing their increases. Was there also negotiation of
some new, some changes to the years. So trying to think of something. The most recent example that I can readily think of is modifications to the Unit 8 contract grid, where we made some adjustments to what their range looks like, the ranges in that one. Some years there's a process under 43A where there's adjustments to the range that a classification is assigned to. So if you flip open to the back of one of those contracts, you'll see line after line after line of salary ranges. And so there's a process where the unions oftentimes present in what they call inequities to bring market data, and we do the compensation team does analysis with regards to that and potentially reassigns the range. And then sometimes where we had identified those really significant market challenges of filling the positions, that's where MND sometimes does that as well.
The reason I bring it up, local or county, I noticed that those unions, there seemed to be a trend where the grid was becoming shorter. Mm-hmm. Is that a sort of a trend with several of them? And my point, right? Lifting people up quicker, and then, but then it holds there for the longer haul. And so then it becomes more weight on cost, cost of living.
Across the board increases, yeah.
Right.
I don't know that I could give you a good sense of like broader trends with regards to that. One of the changes several rounds ago was a couple of the grid cycles, they changed it from an annual increase going through the steps to a 6-month increase. Okay. So that sometimes is adjusted and that works folks up to the top quicker. Yeah. And certainly there's folks that are looking at the length of the schedule and sometimes seeing proposals regarding that.
Thank you.
So two questions. First, the So I was a county commissioner and I retired at the end of the year. But in our meeting with our labor negotiator prior in where we got this, we were told pretty clearly we were going to be in a position where we were going to increase. We would have to pay a bigger amount than we were used to get the settlement. As it turned out, we settled in January and we settled at just kind of felt like it was settlement 2.5, I think. So similar to this. I don't know if you, when you look out there, what's going on, where I know you can't say where you want to be, but do you have a sense from where other places are going?
What I've seen so far, with looking at the data that settlements that have been coming in,
yep.
From Minnesota, we're averaging between 2 and 5% is just what we've been seeing.
Yeah.
With regards to where folks are landing.
Yeah, in St. Louis County, 5% would be really up there. So that would be wild, but that was kind of what we were thinking we might be at. But somehow something happened for the unions where they didn't feel the need for that push that time. But, okay, and then the second question is about turnover. You said it's increased by 4%, it looks like. Is there a sense of why that's pretty dramatic? So
I don't know if you want to take a little bit more of that.
Certainly there was, in the last couple of years, there's also been an increase in retirement. So that plays a small part in it. And I think that we followed a national trend related to people shifting their employment to other places. But we have been looking at retention more specifically. We have a goal around that. And the data in our employee engagement surveys and exit surveys show that certainly salary is a part of that, but it is also related to the relationship that they have with their managers and supervisors and the role that managers and supervisors play in creating a good employee experience and trusting their employees as they work in front of them. It's also related to career advancement, a lack of career advancement or professional development opportunities. Those are, I mean, there's a lot of other things, but those are the things that kind of big umbrellas. I would say where we're hearing from employees that that they're not seeing as much opportunity or they're dissatisfied with their job. But you know, it's certainly the retirements and you know, the national trend, like the Great Resignation played in that made an impact as well.
Okay, just a quick question. The days to fill 80 to 85. Just relative to pre-COVID, what was it?
I feel like we're around 60.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Some of the that would be COVID related, maybe the aging of workforce as well. So I don't see that coming down in the near future to 80, 85. So just wondering if you had the same thought.
You know, because it is challenging when you have vacant chairs. So I would like to see that moving back down, but I'm not sure that I could give you a prognosis.
No, I just looking for a sense.
Yeah, I think that there's maybe part of it is the HR offices have been very busy with high turnover. You know, it just they can only work so fast. Yeah. And so that plays a part in it. And then of course just in some cases we are reposting positions several times to get qualified applicants, things like that impacts the average as well.
Thank you.
It's a huge issue. You know, in my agency, we would post positions for an attorney and I get over 100 applications. And when I left, it'd be close to 20 days long. So, and I can't tell you, it was like overnight. And I honestly can't tell you what happened. My employees blamed it on me.
I think it's the grade age turnover, the bubble fast. I think it is.
Bargaining unit that includes the support staff for the legislature.
The staff, the nonpartisan staff,
They're not.
well, partisan and not all, they're not represented by legislative employees in each of the bodies.
You asked a question this morning.
I did.
Are you gonna ask that same question now, or variation?
Well, I'm gonna ask a variation on it. First of all, I'm gonna, an indication on the graph that you had, where you had increases of 2%, 3% and such. I'm interested to know how much, when you have, let's say, a 3% increase on, let's say, employee contracts of like, which you've got almost 50,000 employees, how much does that increase a budget into the next year? Do you know that?
I can't tell you like how big of the pie the state employee contracts are, the state budget as a whole. I can get that.
Okay.
So you asked, because the budget's already set, so I guess,
yeah,
how big about it?
Well, I'm interested to know going forward how that will, how that number, that percentage increase drives the next
2 years
yes
away.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't happen in a vacuum.
So for each of the bargaining units, we have two data points that are collected. The first is what's the impact on the operations of the current biennium. And then the other number is the impact on the next biennium. And we have what's called a cost settlement sheet that we could bring you from a historical standpoint to kind of see.
You want me to explain it?
Oh, sure.
Assuming I can do it.
Is this information you already gave us?
No, we hadn't brought this in previously.
Jen, you got that? Jen.
But then that could tell you, that could give you a sense of the most recently settled contracts and what the total cost implications.
Or I could just, so the impact of the contracts for this biennium, the impact on this budget is about $460 million. And the impact on the next biennium of these contracts is about $725 million.
So that's already
That's done.
in the budget.
It's in the budget, but that's the impact of the cost increases of the contracts.
To the extent something needed to be not done to cover that. No additional money.
Yes, because the agencies have to balance the cost of the budgets within their existing, or the cost of the contracts within their existing appropriations.
So the question is, did the governor include money or not? Did the legislature provide money or not?
And those increases don't necessarily represent step increases in every amount. It's just
They do for the individuals who are eligible for step increases.
if they negotiate with those. I mean, I worked in an agency where they didn't get step increases. I said, here's your amount, you figure it out.
The majority, I think almost all of the contracts I'm looking at, Jen.
All but one in the faculty.
Okay, they include both a cost of living adjustment, typically effective July 1st of each year, and then a step increase for employees who aren't at the top of their salary range. And I think it's about 30%.
Yeah.
About half of staff aren't at the top of the range and then are eligible for that.
I just want to point out, that's not what Ryan Winkler said tonight. About employee, they said they make an appropriation to the agency, and let the agency figure it out, because I had what they didn't.
Yep, that's absolutely true. So this right now, this legislature will make the determination of the agency operating 24 and 28. And then he then will also be negotiating the contracts, and those costs do have to be acknowledged with the agencies.
happen.
Coalitions make person agree with us.
The next question I have is that, and I asked this, very satisfying answer I got, but I figured one was what impact do you think this council has on its increase, let's say the increase that we give to a legislature salaries, even though it's a small amount of the budget? How is that going to affect negotiations for you all with these unions as you go into May and June?
So it would really be one of the data points that we collect and is taken into consideration, like we collect data points from local government, neighboring states. You know, it's one of the many data points that we review.
Yes.
I'm involved with doing all the negotiations for the employees in the city, representing the city. Never has the conversation ever come up with the unions or non-unions I negotiated with about what our elected officials mean. Has that point ever been brought up to your negotiators from the various employees? Have they ever asked the state legislature got a 2.5% increase for this year, so that should be the base of our demand?
I at least in those rounds that I've been in, I don't recall one of the bargaining units.
Thank you.
I don't know anything to do with anybody else. Thank you. Is Aaron going to present? Or?
No, I'm moral support to help answer questions.
How'd you do, Jen?
Thank you.
How'd you do?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
All right, folks. I think first of all, I think we're at the discussion point here, and I guess the issue is, what do we want to discuss first? Or do we think after we've heard the information, is there additional information that we would like to hear? So I guess to start off at least our discussion, I put forward the question, is there something else we think we need to hear from somebody else? Or is there something else in your mind that is lacking in the information that you've got that would affect our discussions about what we're going to do and how we're going to go about doing it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in deference to what Senator Benson said this morning, I would like to see, say, a 6 or 8 year history on median household income of Minnesota. You know, she used that. I don't know where she got it from. Maybe she had discussion at other times, but who might we turn to?
Great having that information.
While you were having your discussion this morning, we were just doing some quick Google searches and came up with some numbers.
Okay.
What we're not comfortable with is having used those numbers that we came up with on the fly.
Right. Which numbers apply?
Yes.
Oh, right.
I mean, there are many indicators, and we could give you some orders of magnitude if that would be helpful.
Sure.
From what we heard this morning. And while we also asked our reference library to look into this, and they're starting to give us some numbers now. We haven't had a chance to look at them yet. We're just getting them now. We had some census data, just a number for median household income in Minnesota in 2021 was 77,700. And what we don't know is the standard household, I think, is 2.1. We don't have that definition. That's what we're lacking in clarity. Barb found some other data on median family income. A household of one was 65,500. And median household income for a family of two was 88,350.
And that was spring of 22.
Spring of 22.
Say the family of one again.
65,500.
Okay.
If that's help, just to give an order of magnitude of where that is.
So that's worthwhile, but it's also worthwhile to know where it's coming from over the last 5 years. That would be helpful too. I don't know if that's something you can do today, but
I'm certainly interested to know, but I mean, there's a number. I mean, it seems like it's a starting point for us to start having that discussion. It seems to me, as I understood Benson's comments, is that she said, you know, she was willing to go out on the plank and say, without necessarily spitting out a number, but saying the median household income would be 90% of that would be a good point. And when I followed up with her after the meeting, she said, but that would be with no per diem.
right. Yeah. I guess I understood her point a little bit differently. Like she was not that there should be parity with the minimum with the household's income, but that it's the basis for this sort of merit-based increase, and we should be looking at how that median household income has increased in the last biennium. That's how I understood her.
Well, she said going forward, you would base an increase on that. But I understood her to say 90% of the median household income would be a good starting point for what the legislative salary should be.
That's what I thought she said.
And then I followed up, I said, no, you know, I'm seeing numbers that say on average that 9,000, 8,000 is per diem on top of that. She said, I'm not suggesting that the per diem should be out, you know, done away with. And I said, well, we can't do that.
That's right. It's not enough for
but each body can. I mean, I don't know if there's a constitutional provision for the maybe I'm wrong, right? You know that?
No, it's the statute allows for them to be approved by each body.
Oh, yeah.
Chair, another benchmark I looked at this morning is you look at having to rent an apartment here, and me being from far out state Minnesota, it's an added burden on legislators that come from areas like that. If you have to pay $1,500 a month for rent, and if you look at the usual numbers that your housing costs should not exceed 30% of your gross income, if you work that number out, that comes to an annual salary of $60,000, theoretically supports $1,500 a month for housing rent.
We remember that the house incentive each provide housing allowances for their members.
Right. I was trying to find a benchmark, you know, like median household income versus what are housing, what would a typical housing cost be? The problem is there's so many convoluted other there's per diem, there's housing cards, there's mileage.
Right, and it all leads to the cynicism of the constituents to think that they've got their hands in all these buckets. And I suppose arguably maybe it looks that way. But Brian.
Well, this isn't exactly on the topic that you asked us to address initially, which is what more information do we need. But something that the conversation this morning led me to think about. Somebody asked a question about, well, you know, what are some comparable positions that we can compare legislators to? And, we've been looking at this county commissioner information, which, I mean, it's interesting information, but it ranges from, 13,000 to 113, so you really can't take away anything from that. And I think Senator Benson said, well, there's not really anything comparable to that. That's not true. There's nothing exactly comparable to it. There's one other place where people of Minnesota send senators and representatives. That's the U.S. Congress. Now, that's a full-time job, and I agree it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but I got curious about what does a member of Congress make? And what would a member of Congress make for 5 months out of the year? The first part, what does a member of Congress make? It's $174,000 a year. What's that for 5 months? $72,500, which is kind of, it's a little on the high end of the ballpark of stuff we've been talking about, but that seems to me like a useful benchmark.
Would you include per diem in that?
I've been ignoring per diem for the simple reason we can't do anything about it. Not only can we not do anything about it, we are not in a position where we're going to be able to talk to the legislature about cutting some kind of deal with them where we boost your salary, you get rid of per diem. That might be a conversation for another day, but for the purposes of the report, we got to file by the end of the month. I'm ignoring it.
Okay.
Do members of Congress get any housing allowance?
I don't think so.
Based on TV shows that I've watched, they must not. There have been some shows about members of Congress, like 3 of them bunking together. And
Jim Walsh, when he was in Congress, lived in his office.
Yeah, and I know a number of them do, but which suggests that they don't get an allowance.
And then on Thursday, he was on a plane home. I guess so he'd sleep in bed. But no, I don't think.
Supposedly it's illegal for them to sleep in the office, but just so
they are all a lot. Yes.
So with your help, Greg, I want to paint a picture. I know we've gotten all of this data, but you have it at your fingertips. So if the current salary is $48,250, what is the average per diem?
It varies by year and by House and Senate, but a ballpark is around $10,000.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on.
And
that's on this colored sheet that you got last time.
oh, okay. Let me go to that as a reference.
That's for you guys.
Pardon?
So what I'm trying to do is come up with a number that represents an average of the cash they can claim. By the way, what are the tax consequences for senators and representatives? Same as individuals? Else?
Well, it depends. And which filings you're in. Because in the House, if you live more than 50 miles from the capital, your per diem is not taxable. If you are considered metro, your per diem is taxable.
Okay. So
if you're from out of state and you collect per diem and housing allowance that exceeds a federal formula that says you shouldn't collect more than X on any given year, you are then taxed on both your housing and your per diem. So every situation is very unique. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see.
So if you're a member who, like a chair who has that housing year round, you know you get taxed on housing.
So salary, average per diem 10,000. There's another item called communications or
It's a cell phone.
Communications allowance.
Is that something a month?
It's 125 in the house. It's 207. And again,
Per month for 12 months.
And if you take it without documentation, we put it through payroll and tax, it's about $85. If you submit documents, you can get up to 125 with receipts.
Okay, so let's call that 125. That's 1,500. Let's call it 1,500.
On the House side.
And about 2,000 on the Senate side. And 2,400. And is there any other cash flow they can take advantage of? I'm eliminating housing just for a second here.
Mileage, if you want to, I don't know how you want to think about that.
What is it?
Mileage reimbursement for mileage?
I think that's a wash expense.
And some would say that same thing about communications.
Okay, what is mileage, average mileage?
It's 65.5 cents reimbursed.
It looks like it's around 1,400
Well,
per
it
year.
depends, because if you're from Metro, you don't get it.
Right.
Now, let's
If you're
do it
not
all,
from Metro,
because
It's,
go with
it's,
what Brian said, I'm trying to figure out what's the salary yet from a. If they were in a private
Any
sector.
employee gets mileage reimbursement, no matter
if it's,
What you work for, right? Unless you're a small business owner.
yeah.
No, you're trying to get the total compensation.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get.
And then the other thing to remember is, you know, health benefits, all those type things, we were roughly 1,000 a month, and then para, is there a match?
That's a 6%.
6, yep. So,
6 and 40.
6 and 40.
What's the 90% that,
She shot out, she said 90% of the median household income.
median household income?
And the first number that Greg gave us was 77,700 for.
Yeah.
Right, then we heard something later, but 67.
65.5 for single.
Yeah.
Right, and 88.3 for dual household income.
So we were able to find, Barb was able to locate some data that's in the February forecast that just came out. It's not a median number, it's an average number of non-farm wages. And in Minnesota, it's got a trend back to 2020. So we could show you a trend line of that data. If you look forward. Yeah, it was over.
Yeah, that would be worthwhile.
Okay.
So is
Greg,
that,
I'm gonna send this
does that
to you.
also
You pull it
include
up.
going forward to 24, 25, the forecast?
It does do the forecast through 27, actually.
So it's about a 4.3% increase per year.
Yeah,
24,
yeah, yeah. Okay, I sent you the link if you want to go to page 23. I'm sorry, I think I said 23, it's page 36. Many numbers. On the fly.
And I don't know if this helps in the mileage issue, but we only allow for those who live out of state 1 round trip a year during the session. So if they
The
go,
assumption is they come in, they stay, and then they go home.
that's the assumption. Now, if they have to go back 2 or 3 times, that's on them. But could have a meeting in the district, whatever, for us to pay for 1 round trip. No,
And again, that's decided by the legislature, right? Oh, there. So they decide that they only get 1.
Right there.
right here, yeah.
Can they deduct the
here's
mileage
the
from the
direct
first
forecast
other
numbers.
than one?
Starting with this.
This is for Minnesota. So it's 2020 and then it ends at 2027.
Might stay that for the whole week.
Okay. So right in the middle, it says February 2023.
Yeah. Yeah, they're showing,
Farm.
yeah, they're showing what they originally had. So it's this number is what you're gonna wanna look at here, the
Yeah.
64,000. This is what they had included in the November forecast, is this line down here, and so this is adjusted now for the February.
So that first number of 7.2, that would.
Or I'm sorry, yeah,
7.2, that would be a percentage increase over.
from the prior year, yep,
Is it 7.2 or 7.2?
7.2
Oh, okay.
this first year, but then it goes
It's
into,
reflecting inflation.
yeah, it goes into between 4 and a high of 4.4.
And in the first year's 20, right?
Yeah.
Almost 20, 21, 22.
That's income alone, that's not adjusted for inflation.
Correct.
That's average, not median.
Is each column household size?
I think it's just average. I don't think it's institutional. Not for everywhere.
But what's the number, 64 or 86? What's that based on?
It's 64,376.
Yeah, but then what,
Those are the percentage increases going forward.
what's out there at 86,000? What is that number represent?
What year is that? Or, pull that.
Oh, that.
Okay, year, 122 and then end of 2027. And those last four, obviously, or the last three are forecasts.
Yes. Four forecasts.
Four,
For five.
4, 5, 6, and 7, that's right.
23, 24, 25, 26, and 27, okay.
Okay.
So it gives you, this is one data point that could show you a trend line.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to preface my remarks with simply say, Brian, I like your analogy. I like your methodology and how we get to some kind of substantiation of the number of increases we go over. I think some makes solid sense. You're at around 75, and we're looking at 64 here. So I think where we're falling is somewhere between that 64 and 65. The bigger question is, are they going to allow it? And are we spinning our wheels? And it doesn't matter.
Let me make a suggestion.
Sure.
We sort of come up with that number, but we add in the per diem.
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
Well, what we say is like, okay, you're making 48.7 now, but we understand that you're gonna get on average over the 2 years, $9,000 to $10,000 a year in per diem. Now, not everybody gets that, but I can't force people to take it. Citizen legislature analysis, and then sort of look at the 6%, whatever little bits we can add to that, and then figure out, do we just say, well, let's just give them the 4%, a 4% to the base salary, knowing that they're going to be at about 72. Is that, I mean, that's a suggestion. I'm not, if people want to go in a different direction, I'm just trying to articulate.
But it was full volatile.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that has a lot of merit to it. Set aside what the numbers are, I think there's a lot of merit. We had something we can explain in an elevator.
Right. I like what Brian said. I also like to say in the report, you guys ought to get rid of per diem.
Yeah.
And pay a wage. And stop this finding the peanut.
Right, forcing people to be
disingenuous and
what did Senator Benson say? I encourage you, don't be in the top three.
Right. It's gotten so political and so dumb that it's just, I mean, somebody's got to say, you need to stop this.
Okay.
And you need to sort of add into what your average per diem is into the base salary, which, I mean, we're going to be here together for the next 4 years. We may be able to do that, but I think the report we should submit should have that in it.
not opposed.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think Michelle, you know this because you helped prepare it, but in the conclusion of the report, the last one in 2021, we include a minority report reflecting the perspective that per diem is outside the purview, and as such, there should not be any recommendation. The author was clear that he separately supported salary determination. In other words, get rid of the per diem, right? So this would.
I mean, Greg would probably be the best to respond to this and kind of the historic nature of the salary council with respect to discussion on per diem.
I understood that member's perspective somewhat differently.
Please.
That he believed that especially for members from legislators in greater Minnesota who have large distances, that they needed that income from the per diem to make up for the shortness of the salary. And to protect that perspective, he thought that this council shouldn't even talk about per diem, much less even make a recommendation about it. Sally and okay.
I'm not looking to kill a golden calf here, but I think we should say, I mean, I'm not saying they couldn't get the benefit of what they're getting for the per diem. That, you know, legislators should make, let's say if it's 72 grand, they should get that. Right?
So I'm a guy, so I can only do one thing at a time. I heard 90% of the median income as the base salary. That'd be from one of our numbers, that 90% number would be about $58,000. And then the idea is to talk about putting an amount for a per diem on top of that as salary. Is that?
No, it's the opposite.
Yeah, that's what
Okay.
It's the opposite.
So is it factoring that a portion of that dollar amount would be salary plus per diem to get to that 90% number?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. As the rationalization.
Right. In which case they're kind of already there.
Right.
So I just, you know, one of the perspectives of somebody who's long driven back and forth to the cities from way out. And, you know, I've done it for nearly 30 years for work. And there is a real difference between people who serve from outstate Minnesota and people who serve within the 50 miles. And the per diem, I think, is a different animal for them. Now, I don't know how they use it. So I don't know, the people within 50 miles can't get it? Is that, they can't or they can't? They might not take it out. But anyway, so for me, it actually, for the person who's coming down here from has to rent an apartment, has to get their meals, etc. I get the per diem piece. What has always been, what's challenging to me is to look at the fact that the Senate has one, the House has another, that people get to use it if they want to use it or not use it. That's the part that doesn't seem clear to me, and certainly would make the public feel a little question what they see. Like per diems, as has been pointed out, are something that people can see as misused, whether or not they are. But I would say that for many of the, think of Rob Eklund, who used to serve from International Falls. That's about as far from the Twin Cities as you can get. And to be here, he commonly came the day before, you know, he spent more time, etc. I just don't know how to thread that needle, but I don't know that assuming that we could increase their what they get paid would do that for the outstate folks.
I think when I was talking what Brian had suggested and what I tried to articulate, I wasn't saying get rid of per diem. What I was saying is we need to recognize that they get it. But I do think as a matter of policy going forward, they really need to think about, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that everybody's getting per diem equitably to begin with because of the politics of it.
Right.
And I think what Brian and I were sort of suggesting is to say, well, let's look at a number that includes what they would get in per diem. So right now they're at 48, so they're at 58 right now. And then, you know, when you add in whatever little things they are, and we're not adding in the housing portion of it, and then give them essentially that cost of living increase of 4%. For the median.
What's the point? 4% for each
of the base
for each of 2 years.
Yeah.
So then it's 8%.
That's what they recommended, 3.8 last time, and it was each year. Is that correct?
They can only.
You set the salary
salary range.
So
So
it could be an 8% increase to account for a 4 and a 4. Actually, it would be
Actually,
6
or 9,
Because it's,
or 8, 6.
Yeah.
If you want to increase it 4% this year and then 4% the next year, that would be 6% for the 2 years.
Oh,
I can follow that.
Well, if you're gonna up it, if your thought is, let's take it up 4% this year and then another 4% the following year, the net would be, it's not exactly, but it would be, give them 6% for the 2 years. That way they get 4% and then they get the additional 4%.
the benefit.
In other words, it's the average of the increase for 2 years.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
If that's what you want to get.
That, and I'm just saying that articulates what you and I were
Yes.
thinking. We're not saying get rid of per diem, because we don't have that ability.
I know that. I mean, the argument though, so tell me again what your idea is. Your idea is to say, we take the 48, we add the 10,000 to it, and then we do a increase of 4% based on the two together. Is that what you're saying?
So there are a couple of different things going on here, and you're articulating both of them together, which is not quite what we were talking about. So, at least talking from where I was starting, I was saying, let's find a benchmark, and then kind of work backward from that, back out, what the average per diem is, and then that would be our number. We have also been talking about, well, when we arrive at that number, how do we justify it? And one of the ways to justify it is based on median income and increases. But those are kind of coming at the same point from different directions. You're talking about coming at the same point from the two directions at the same time, which is why you're not wrong, but it's a little confusing to think of it that way. It's like Greg said, if you can only think of one thing at a time, that's two things at a time. And so we never did talk. We have talked about a number of different possible benchmarks. I talked about congressional salaries. We've been talking about Senator Benson's suggestion of 90% of the household income. And then there's at least 3 different household income numbers we've heard. So we haven't landed on the benchmark yet, but I was more suggesting, let's figure out what that benchmark is and then kind of back our way into it for our report.
It's always good to ask dumb questions so we clarify.
Well, and sometimes chairs can talk too much.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
If we were taking 6% on the current salary 48,250 plus 10, which is 58,250, taking 6% of that, that's about $3,500. If you work that backwards, that's about a 7% increase.
To the 48,250.
Right.
Greg, I'm sorry, could you restate that one more time?
So if you take the current salary of 48,250, add the 10,000 that is the average per diem, that's 58. You multiply that by 6%, which is what Benny was talking about. That adds up to about $3,500. You add that to the current salary to see what the impact of what your job is on salary. That results in about a 7% increase, and legislative salaries would increase to about 51,600.
52. So I think that's a good capitalization, Greg. 48,250 plus 10 times 6% gets us to what number?
35. Oh, what
does that number get us to?
61.6. The 61.5.
Okay, so let's call it 61.5. And what is that number 90% of?
Oh.
90% of a congressman's salary.
I have to go back to my
61.50 divided by 0.9.
Yeah, so it's a little less.
Yeah. What was your formula then?
So, you take starting at 48,250.
Yep.
Plus 10. Times the times 1.06%.
Yep.
That gets us to 61,500, I think you said.
61.
Divide that number by 0.9.
68,605.
There.
What was that? I'm sorry, 58, did you say?
68,605. So if we were to take 4% 1 year, 4% the next year, but average that, so it's 6% for the 2 years, that would result in, what's the dollar amount of that? Did you say, Greg, 3,500?
Yes.
3,500. So that would get us to 68,605, which is that in the sniffing range of the
Yes, 72.5 is 5 months of a member of Congress's salary.
Yeah, but if I could just add in, of course, this per diem calculation, we're making an assumption about 10. Now the house number is less. The Senate number is close to 10, but there's only half of the number, but they're collecting almost as much as the House is collecting.
No, this is the average, so it's by average per member.
Right. Okay.
Well, and just to point out that 1 year it may be 10, next year maybe 6.
Yeah, exactly.
And we know that not every member of the legislature takes all the per diem that they could. Is that correct? Correct.
And in the Senate,
Please.
in the Senate, I will say that in past years, not with this current election cycle, but in the past, we would have a handful that maxed out. So I know exactly that is their number, all the way down to none.
None.
We let people who do not want it, or you get per diem for legislature or gavel in, gavel out per session. There are some members that hold jobs that they cannot be away during like that. They take only 3 days a week of per diem as opposed to 7. Same thing. There are those who have, or why I don't know, but have decided to take 90% of their per diem number. The same thing happens with communications. Some take 2,400 and some take none.
Because they don't want to be number one.
No, that is true. However, because this is so standardized, it is the same data that goes out. So the top of every 4 or 5 actually will be consistent because they're maxed.
And I don't know if it's so this year's session is 140 days. If someone took per diem every single day in this house, it's 9,200. Next year's session could be 5 days. And if someone took it every day, $5,610. I don't have the proportions of how many actually take it every day, but a large number of them don't. You could do the same number. It'd be a third higher. 30% price.
And just a point of clarification, I'm assuming we are only talking per diem, not session per diem, not income per diem. Including income per diem?
Yeah, I don't know. I was just doing session.
Okay, so it is only session per diem. So that may mean that they would still be. I'm just saying.
So interim per diem is what they could get if they are actually come back to the Capitol for a meeting, whatever that meeting might be.
Yeah. So, I think this makes the argument for using the median individual income as opposed to doing this kind of complicated. And we could do it based on the congressional salary, either one, I don't care, but using a specific number, not including per diems because they're all over the place, and saying we either do what Greg has suggested, which is you take the amount of that, the 65,500, and do an increase that will slowly build to them being closer to that each year. So if you did the 3,500, I don't know how you would do this, but you could do it so that you would start building toward getting to that median income. Not jumping to it immediately, but you would use that as your argument for building toward that number.
I like, just, it's close to what you're saying. I like the 9.5 number. I like how that starts it. And if it's a table, that's good to work with. It's what, 64 or something.
Yeah.
You know, so it's at that 65.
Non-farm average.
Yeah.
When we do this, and the premise, we're accepting the premise we heard this morning that this is functionally a full-time job. Is that our understanding?
Mashed in with this, it's a citizen legislature, it's public service, and trying to sort of get your arms wrapped around that in a pay scale. Good luck. And my argument is that, how does per diem help this? It doesn't. It actually politicizes it to the extent that you probably have people who are working and deserve the money, but aren't taking it because they're going to get pounded.
But ethically, they may think that way within themselves.
That's true, but I bet it's those that think ethically about it, much smaller number.
I'm not sure what you're saying here.
But I don't know, I just think we, to some degree, we're obligated or beholden to this premise that this is a half-time or three-quarter time job, and if that there's going to be a change to that, you know, that prism, it should maybe come from a place less radical than this body.
Right.
In principle, I agree with that, but the only such place would be to amend the Constitution, because this is baked in from 1858, that the legislature is not allowed to meet after whatever it is, the third Monday in May or something like that. And that was done at a time where the state was rural, underpopulated, and nobody has wanted to change it since then, because we still have this fiction that it is a part-time citizen legislature. But 150 years down the road, it's just not true. But there's nobody in between us and a vote of the people to change the Constitution that can do that.
Steve?
I support the whole conversation of tying the salary to benchmark. I also think the per diem is what has everybody confounded. And those of us that worked in the private sector got a per diem. There's basically a meal allowance per day, and which is far less than what the per diems are here. So I'm supportive of what I consider a reasonable and pay adjustment for the next biennium, which in my world, that's 3.5% a year minimum. But I would hope our report would strongly suggest that if the legislature doesn't clean up this per diem situation, then in 2 years, when this body meets again, I'm not going to be as agreeable on a salary adjustment if they keep using this as hidden income, especially when you don't have legislators that are equally in need of that per diem or equally taking advantage of it or using it. Why someone doesn't claim it is beyond me. But
well, if you know Matt Intenza,
I do know Matt Intenza because
he's from Warrington.
Yeah,
but I mean, he didn't need to take it.
No, he didn't.
Right.
So
until he got divorced.
So what are the reasons they don't take it? They don't need it, or they choose to.
It's politics.
Politics.
They're going to get hammered with
because they're opponent of the next elections and say these guys take the money from you.
Right.
They don't want to give it.
Right.
Or they're in the headline of the Star Tribune article.
That's the, yes, top three.
Yeah. Which is the same thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it's funny because the 3 and 3, 3.5 and 3.5 is basically the 7 that Greg came up with. I mean, we're at, it sounds like a similar kind of increase. We get there multiple ways.
Of course, yeah.
But it sounds like that 3,500 or whatever that number was makes sense, and to see it increase by that from my perspective.
I want to acknowledge our folks that are visiting us virtually.
He has his hand up.
Engaged. Ken.
How you doing, young man?
Diane, Ken, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I've been listening to the round and round, and I think I couldn't tell who was speaking last.
Normally you could hear Ken from the handle.
That the 3,500 seems to be roughly the number.
Diane, are you able to hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you say something?
Unmute and talk to us.
Yes, I can hear you.
No, we can't hear that.
Okay, sorry,
Can
we're
you-
having technical issues right now.
Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
They must not be able to hear you, Ken. I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you, but I guess they can't hear us.
We cannot hear them.
Are they coming through this?
Can you say something now?
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
So how does everybody feel? I mean, it was a statement made by one person, and does everybody talk? Nothing? I mean, we started on the topic. What do everybody's feeling about it?
Paul, the last 2 percentage increases that came out of the legislative council were 3.3% per biennium. Is that correct, Greg?
3.3 and 3.8.
3.3 and 3.8. So
3.8.
So if I think about that in the context of 4 and a 4 resulting in a 6%, I'm a little uncomfortable about that. 6% as compared to the previous 2 years. So that's how I see it.
So from perspective, you know, this is related to the some of it. When I had this long conversation. And it's clear to me that we moved, and I think this is what Senator Johnson said as well, really get into the legislature because there is some kind of remuneration and it's really for people who live out of state because many of them cannot hold down another job, which is a really challenge. So I 90% because I think it speaks to that specific group of people we're going to lose if we don't have the income at an appropriate rate.
I'm not as worried about maintaining the level of increase that we had in the previous 2 bienniums because the cost of living over the most recent double was increasing too. I mean, really 6%.
I'm not really concerned with the 90%. What I'm concerned about is keeping good talent, paying people for what they do, which is a good job, and putting on a technical scale, which I think Brian and you guys are doing that is a portion of 120 to 130 days based on a congressional thing. It all makes sense. We're not treating it, not saying it's a full-time job, we're saying given this amount, here's our budget. And the number is whatever the number is, whatever we think is the number, whether it's 66,000 finally or 72,000. That can be fleshed out. But, I'm not gonna get caught up on small things. I just want to get good number of support.
This is second up in
I understand.
2 years, 2020, this month, hearing and consideration. I feel like legislature really fits it well to two groups of people, revising income. People that have enough wealth, they're going to take the time and make it work. And also take the time to urban, it's for young.
Ken, are you able to hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you, Diane.
Okay. Well, you and I can have our own conversation, I guess.
Well, I mean, I just think you do the 3,500-ish. And then you do the and you invite leadership to come before us sometime well in advance of next year or 2 years from now when we have to do this all over again, and invite them to explain to us why per diem matters and why we shouldn't chuck it.
Yeah, I mean, I read that minority report the way the gentleman said before about it being necessary for outstate.
Yep.
Which I think seems to be getting a little bit lost here.
Yes, and I understand why it's probably necessary for outstate legislators, especially those from Timbuktu.
You're having trouble hearing us.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Ken and I were going to have our own little conversation and make a decision on our end.
Look, I'm not trying to eliminate per diem. I'm just talking about its reality. I mean, there's this bucket of money that they access that's really paid. And why not convert that to pay and then change? I mean, really what they should do is change per diem into, here's your breakfast allowance, your lunch allowance, your dinner allowance. We're already providing your housing or a good number for that. I mean, that's really, and it's become a political football so that some take it, some don't. And, and it makes this, when you're trying to pay people, you want to be fair. That's making this difficult. And I think at a minimum, we should articulate that. So I'm not trying to eliminate it because I have no authority to do it. It's just that I don't think per diem is equitable. Right.
So I agree with, I think we should say something about that, but I think we should base our figuring on some other number, whether it's the farm income, the average farm income, the 5 months of congressional pay. I don't care, because I think whenever we add it in, it just it confuses it. At the same time, I think we could put it in the report that we think it does make it politically difficult or challenging to make these decisions. Mr. Chair,
let's Stephen and Ken.
Along these lines, we can make it clear in our report that this same body will convene in 2 years. And it may be a short initial meeting if the legislature has done nothing to address what we think are inequities in per diem. We can convene and be done in a half an hour with no pay adjustment.
It is funny that my per diem over all these years is $65 a day for, what is it?
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah. Lunch and $5 if you're out of town or incidental.
Right.
So.
Ken.
Thanks. And it seems like that 3,500 number was kind of everybody's consensus, and I don't know who it was who said that before, but do we have the authority in the next 2 years to invite the leadership to come speak to us and have a serious conversation about per diem?
I need an opinion from my lawyer.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, I understand. That's why I asked the question.
But because there's the prohibition on communication with having any contact with a member of the legislature, I think it'd be difficult to have this sitting leadership, but perhaps the council could hear from past leadership as it's had speakers in the past.
Well, I mean, then it seems to me we're stuck in this endless circle of we write a report, they ignore it, we write a report, they ignore it. And the only way that we can get heard in the end is next time, and I'm just pulling a number out of the air, if we authorize a $51,000 salary for the next 2 years, that we reduce it to $35,000 because we're mad about per diem. And that doesn't seem to me to be a very logical result.
Could be a bit heavy-handed, but I see your point. I mean, we could say something. I think we can say something in the report, and the report will be public.
Yep, but they tried that 2 years ago.
Ken, I know why you say they tried it because we just heard an excerpt from last year's report. What we heard was this sort of came up in a minority report. We're going to have one sentence toward the end about it. You know, I'm not sure that's really kind of bumped them on the nose.
It was nuanced.
Yes. You had to dig kind of deep.
It's been in the report every year since 2017,
but here's my suggestion.
and pretty thorough.
Have it be the first paragraph of the report with a fairly bold heading, and I'm pretty sure some newspapers are going to pick it up. It has not been in a place where anybody's really going to notice it before. Put it in a place where people will notice it, and it'll get some coverage, and they'll get the message in a different way. They might not do anything differently, but they'll hear it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if the people
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting thing. Legislative Salary Commission caps per diems.
Right.
So I have a question for staff. So you said it's been in the report. Has this been the same debate every year?
Yes. Every year, it's been the same thing. As you know, you are required to account for other forms of compensation, so it comes up. It's been very similar concerns. So the report has, I think every year, correct me, said members would support a higher increase if per diem went away. At the same time, making clear they support finding a way to compensate for real expenses. So it's not about getting rid of some of those expenses, just finding a different way to do it.
So bold doesn't work, I don't think.
Well, I don't think we tried bold.
Yeah, well, we could.
We have not. You could put it in the cover letter, even in that. Some more attention.
You put it in the first paragraph of the cover letter. We've said this 3 times now and you haven't listened. Listen to this.
You're right, insanity is doing the same thing year after year and expecting different results.
Right. Well,
I'm in favor of the first paragraph of the cover. I do think that's true, but really making a point that this is a challenge and pointing out that every one of the commissions has talked about it is worth saying, because we've spent almost all our time on per diem here.
well, I guess we're I guess I want to talk about where we want to go from here. We have a meeting scheduled for March 10th, which is next Friday. we certainly can mull over what we've discussed. I think we have some, you know, I mean, I think I'm getting a consensus that we have an agreement that we would do the, what is it, the 6 or 7% number, but we want to make a strong statement about the deal, making this process very, very difficult. In trying to be fair.
Sure. Brian had a marker number. What's that exact number that you had?
72.5.
Okay, 72.5. That's one marker. We also have a household income number. Greg, was it 77,700? That's another marker. And then we also had a single non-farm income marker of 65,500. Is that correct?
I showed the non-farm wage was at 64.3. That was the first number I remember.
That was 2020.
Oh.
The median income for 65.
For an individual, right? What median household income was 77.7.
Yeah.
Right. Correct. So those are 3 different markers. So one thing we might consider is which of the markers that we're aiming to, and is 90%, which is what Senator Benson suggested, is that the right percentage? So if you establish the marker and establish the percentage and establish what number you're going to attribute to per diem, you know, is it 10, is it 8, is it 12, whatever, then that'll get you to what's the number that we want the legislators to be at, and you calculate the difference between that and 48,250, and that's your number. And I think if that number gets to be, if that number is a 6% number, I could support that, but I feel more comfortable supporting a number closer to 3.8, which is what last year done. Except you made a good point, Brian, which is the last 2 years
very
high inflation CPI, right?
And I think also some discussion in the report about how we want to conceptualize this work. Is it a 3/4 time job? Is it a full-time job? And going forward, what should be the
I want to say one more thing. Yeah. In all of these discussions, it's interesting to me that, you know, I asked the 3 retired legislators, you know, what compelled you to make that decision? Barb Haley said, I was working in healthcare, I felt I could have an impact. Michelle was a CPA, she also felt she could have an impact. Ryan was dealing with, I don't remember exactly, but it seems to me the compelling reason they get into the legislature is different than the decision they make to stay in the legislature. And I don't think there's anything we're going to do that's going to change that. You know, when somebody decides to enter elected office, they're not thinking about that dollar number. They're thinking about, I'm called to service. Somebody thinks I could do a good job. They're, to a greater or lesser degree, they're thinking about the power that they have in, and also winning a vote amongst all their constituents. All those things contribute to them to getting into it. But then the reality hits them about what this job entails and the money, and perhaps after 1 or 2 sessions, they realize, you know, I just can't do it anymore. Or I'm so sick and tired of the critics that are just skewering me left and right.
I just want to respond though, my decision for the commissioner, though, I will say I have the passion and all the reasons you stated, but I still had to look at my family budget, internally, to know that is a proper decision for my family. So it's there, but I think once that decision was made in my head, away we go. I'm all in. I told myself, okay, but I also had to push in my wife was very comfortable with it.
Right.
Well, I just want to make an argument for, if we are going to use the 90% of something number to start, that we use it either I don't care if it's the individual family or individual farm income, that we use one of those and not the, given the tension about politics and who gets paid what, and as we heard, I think Michelle said this morning, somebody said about how they're all rich and getting richer. I just want to use one of those numbers. I think that the numbers for individuals strike me as the best one to use. And that's where I'd start. I just think those, and I think there's a very good reason for using.
Just to put you back, both comments, I'm more comfortable with the median individual than I am the median household.
Yeah. Just, if I could just weigh in, just so you know, Frank, the 2023 number is 27.9. It is 72.9. And then and this is median income.
It's the average non-farm that we displayed from the forecast.
Household 24. Household number?
We don't know. Yeah, we have to find it.
I mean, but we started at, this is where we've done the table that we went from the 64.3.
Yeah.
And as we moved up to get to 23, so we're at the year 2023, it's at 72.9. So in that respect, we don't have to say it's Brian's number for Congress, but we got the number.
That was 2023 median household income.
Yes.
Average household wage. Average non-farm wage. So that would be a single. That would be an individual.
Which is, we're just paying a person. We're not trying to make their house.
Average non-farm wage.
Right.
72.
So it's just, what just depends on what label we want to put on it. We don't have to put Brian's label on it.
I got no investment in that. I just,
we were just looking for a number. Right. Me either. And I see your point. We start comparing them to Congress, they may have a riot. Yeah.
There's actually a question about our 80/10.
Okay.
I have a question for Michelle. With the exception of the logic or the words describing how we got here, do you feel like you have the rest of the body of the report?
So we can come with a draft of it based on some of the principles you've been identifying in your discussion for you, and we can send it to you in advance of the meeting too, that you have it, so you have a chance to review it a couple of days.
And would have discussions about, we considered per diem, we considered discussions from other folks. Does it also, could you also make sure it includes discussion about the question that the chairman asked? Does our decision impact labor relations? I think we got an answer to that. It seemed to be no.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was surprised.
So,
is there anything that was not in the report previously within the time?
Just want to touch on the labor relations. I understand why it isn't a factor, because in the labor negotiations, this group is so far behind and that it's not even started. And just on city government, for instance, negotiating a salary for a city administrator, if it gets above the highest level of union, then you have a problem.
I can see what you're saying.
Also, I kind of wonder whether the labor negotiators noticed the legislator not getting a raise for, a decade or whatever it was. I don't want to talk my card to those guys.
Be quiet.
I just wanted to, because this is a new body, beginning to think that were we in some respect making sort of policy by our action? And I got sent roundly no.
Yeah. But just because it has been passed, I don't think means that it couldn't be in the future if the right union benefits all the information.
Well, I think we got at least an answer to put in the report, and I agree with Barry that we should put them on there. Yes, sir.
So, Michelle, do you also need the number? Is it useful for us to decide on the number of the raise now?
We don't need that determination to be made today. Whenever you do get to that point, you will want a formal motion and take a roll call vote on what it is. We can do the math as you've discussed and help you take a look at what that will be. But you do have a significant number of members who weren't present today. So whether or not if we're prepared to take a roll call if someone wants to make a motion and of what the amount would be, we can take that, or you could wait and have that be part of next week's discussion. Couple options next Friday would be, one is making the determination, having a discussion on the draft, providing feedback and changes that you want to the draft, holding another meeting the next week to do a final review, or you can, as a body, also authorize the chair and vice chair to approve the final report. You can instruct staff to incorporate it.
So
are you able to hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, I was one of the members that was not able to participate this morning, and I understand that the presentations were recorded, so I planned on listening to that. So I just wanted to give you that heads up. I think that was sort of the conversation that took place the last time. So I'm not prepared to commit, I guess, one way or the other. I think I understand the nature of the conversation and I understand sort of how you're getting there, but I would like that opportunity.
Sure. I mean, just 90% of that 72.9 is 65. 628.
Before you back up again.
Yeah. Yes.
I guess if we're trying to bring this to a conclusion for today, I know I feel we're trying to have consensus in the two. I'm not going to personally just say, oh, I'm not going to get caught up in $200. I mean, whatever markers we use. I think we've done a good job on our justification. I just want the group to know I will not probably be here on the 10th. Okay, I'll be flying back. The last part of it, I may be on Zoom. The conversation today, I'm very comfortable if it continues for the markers that we're talking about, using that 90%. My highest comfort level would be have your discussion again, come with the final number, as you mentioned, put a draft report together, and then a week later, I would be very comfortable leadership with moving forward. So we don't want to come again for a third time.
So I would only like to be clear about what you might be suggesting as the actual number that's incorporated. Now, is it the an increase of 3,500 moving toward that's based on the 65, 7 and whatever?
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, we're looking at 90% of a number, which we think maybe 72.9 and change.
Yep.
Which comes out to be 65.8 or something along those.
65, 633 to be precise. Sorry.
I'm precise. But anyway, so that we would base our increase off of that.
Right.
We would castigate per diem, but say, we're giving you an increase based on what we think you should be at 65.
Right, exactly. And so that increase is somewhere in the range of 35 $4,000.
Is that right, Greg?
No.
The $3,500 was based on, current salary plus per diem, which gets you to about 58.2. A 6% increase on that brings you to about 61.8. That's what generates the $3,400 in increase.
Do it at 65.
We're at 65, yeah.
Okay.
For the
First, I'd like.
we're not saying it, we just want to know what that number is.
Can we agree that the base number we're gonna use is the 2023 average non-farm wage of $72,900? Yeah.
I think we have consensus on that, but I understand that on the 10th, we may have to open that trunk again.
Okay. Then it's a matter of what percentage of that gets us to the total income of wage plus a $10,000 average per diem.
Well, we're making an assumption about
yeah.
the per diem. We're not, because we can't make a recommendation.
Right. But that's what we're using that $10,000 as really what they're
as a thumbnail,
what they have the opportunity to.
They can fix it.
But every legislator, there's different per diem between House and Senate, but generally, if they all decided to claim it, it would account for about $10,000.
Yeah.
So as I understand this, the idea would be to take 72.9, take 90% of that, which is 65, and then do the percentage of that, which is what?
About $3,900,
and make a recommendation for an increase in the salary from 48 by 3,900. When you, okay, I lost the math here. The 65,610 times what percent?
6%.
Times 6%.
Yeah, which is the average.
All right.
Of the 4,343.
All right. All right. Is that what we?
I think that's the consensus we're at. If somebody disagrees, let me know. I'm fairly confident that's where Denny's at.
Yeah. That's 3,900.
38 is the number I came up with. So the base number we're working from is non-farm wages, and for 2023 that's 72,926. And from Senator Benson's suggestion this morning, we were going to use 90% of that number, so that's 65,633. And then from Denny, 4 and a 4, 4% and 4% increase for 2 years, but we're going to average that to be 6. That dollar amount increase is 39.38.
And that would increase from 48 to 51, 52, almost 52.
Whatever the final number is, we'd like the report to clearly state the whole formula that we, so that in 2 years we remember what we did.
Okay.
So the public would see that increase based on the current salary, just on what you're doing on salary at about 8%.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So reaching that is sort of a consensus as we were today. Let's come back 10 o'clock on the 10th. After we sort of run this through our minds, we'll have a discussion to make sure we're comfortable with that and entertain any new ideas that may come up. And hopefully we've got a number and then we can finalize the report. And at that point, we follow Paul's suggestion that if we're we're in agreement that that's where we should go, and then we'll put that together and then move forward. Okay.
And that timeline still works for you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That
gives us plenty of time to finalize things, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so Ken sent a note in the chat. Ken, do you want to have a comment?
Sorry.
Oh, sure, that's fine. I'm not gonna be at the next meeting. But this 52,000-ish salary number that we're kicking around seems reasonable to me.
65,633. Okay. Well. All right. Then a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we'll see you all on, or we'll see you those who can be here at the 10. We need a quorum, guys.